They didn't just take my job. They took the part of me I built with late nights, early mornings, and skipped weekends. I gave them everything, believing loyalty meant something. Turns out loyalty's just a placeholder until someone younger, cheaper, or more obedient walks through the door. That Thursday, I learned the truth. Have you ever been in a situation where you gave everything to a job, only to have it taken away unexpectedly? How did you bounce back? And what did you learn from the experience? Drop a comment and let me know what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. I see every one of you. My name's Ethan Cole, 34 years old, born and raised in Ohio, living in the outer edges of Chicago now. I'd been climbing the ladder since my early 20s. Never took shortcuts, never screwed anyone over, never kissed up. Just kept my head down and got things done. That used to be enough. Somewhere along the line, it stopped being. I knew something was off the moment I walked in that morning. The air felt heavy, and not in the weather way. Colleagues didn't meet my eye. My boss, Greg, didn't stop by my desk like he usually did. Then Laura from HR appeared with that carefully neutral face and asked me to step into one of the glass fishbowl conference rooms. I didn't need to ask why. Greg was already there, sitting like a man who'd practiced this conversation in the mirror. Same rolled-up sleeves, same phony compassion in his voice. "Ethan, this isn't easy for us either," he said, like I was supposed to make him feel better. He leaned forward like we were still friends. We weren't. Not anymore. "You've been a strong contributor," he went on, "but the company's going through restructuring. Some tough calls had to be made." I sat there and nodded like a good soldier. My brain went somewhere else entirely, though, thinking about how I'd stayed late last week to fix his quarterly report. How I mentored 2 of the interns who now had full-time jobs while I was getting a paper folder full of severance. How I'd been the one person on the team who didn't play politics. And maybe that was my biggest mistake. He pushed the folder across the table. My name was spelled wrong on the cover. I didn't ask questions. I didn't rage. I shook Laura's hand, gave Greg a long look without saying a word, and left. My stuff was already in a box by the door. They didn't even let me pack it myself. Just my things. Cold and impersonal. Family photo, old coffee mug, the keyboard I liked because it clicked just right. I stood in the parking lot for a while before I could even unlock my car. Just breathing, listening to the wind tear through the concrete. No job. No paycheck. No warning. Just gone. I wasn't sure what came next, but as I sat behind the wheel staring through the windshield like it held answers, one thought came through louder than the rest. Greg may have won today, but this story isn't ending with me as the victim. The first week was the hardest. Not because of the money. I'd saved a decent cushion over the years, but because of the nothingness. The way the hours stretched out like an empty highway with no signs, no exits, no direction. I woke up at 7 a.m. every day out of habit, got dressed, made coffee, and then just stood there. Nowhere to go. No Slack messages. No emails to dodge. Just silence. I tried to keep busy. I helped my neighbor patch his fence, drove to the grocery store for no reason, applied to jobs I didn't even want. I'd catch myself glancing at my phone, waiting for some phantom meeting notification that never came. The hardest part wasn't being unemployed. It was feeling unneeded, like the world kept turning, and I wasn't a part of the machinery anymore. One afternoon, I walked down to this small corner diner I used to hit on Fridays before the pandemic. Rossi's. Quiet, unpretentious, smelled like fresh bread and grease. I hadn't been there in months, maybe longer. But as soon as I walked in, it was like something settled in me. The place hadn't changed. Same booths with worn red vinyl, same crooked specials board, same older guy behind the counter flipping burgers like he'd been doing it since Reagan. I ordered coffee and a burger, slid into the booth by the window, and just watched the world shuffle by outside. I noticed something as I sat there. Peace. The kind of peace I never found in meetings or performance reviews or KPIs. And then, like some twisted sign from the universe, Greg walked in. He didn't see me at first, just strutted up to the counter like he owned the place, ordered his usual, and greeted the staff by name. I realized then this was his spot. Of course it was. The way he smiled, like he was part of some secret club. He sat 2 tables down, laughing into his phone like the world was his to conquer. I watched him for a long time, not out of bitterness, but curiosity. He didn't look like a man struggling to make hard decisions. He looked comfortable, triumphant even. And that was the moment, right there in the soft light of a mid-afternoon lunch rush, that the flicker inside me turned into something sharper. Not rage, not envy. Resolve. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Rossi's, about Greg, about how some people get to walk away clean, while others get left with cardboard boxes and unanswered questions. I wasn't about to let that be the end of it. I didn't want revenge for the sake of pain. I wanted something fair. Something that would make Greg understand, in a way that no speech ever could, what it felt like to be discarded like junk mail. And it started with one idea, one I couldn't shake. What if I bought Rossi's? The idea sounded crazy at first. I wasn't a chef. I didn't know how to run a restaurant. Hell, I barely knew how to slice an onion without Googling it first. But there was something about Rossi's that felt real, human, like a piece of the world Greg couldn't touch. That was enough to make me want to learn. I went back the next day, and again the day after that. I started talking to the staff, little by little. The guy behind the counter, Joe, was the owner. Late 60s, Italian-American, voice like gravel and hands that looked like they'd flipped 1,000,000 pancakes. On my 4th visit, I asked him straight up if he'd ever thought about selling. He squinted at me over his reading glasses and said, "Kid, this place is me." Why? I told him the truth. Not all of it, just that I'd been let go, was looking for a new direction, and had always respected places like his. I mentioned I'd been coming there for years, that I loved the soul of the joint. Joe softened. Said he'd gotten a few offers over the years, but none that felt right. Said if he ever did sell, it wouldn't be to some chain or slick investor who'd turn it into another sterile brunch spot. "I'd only hand this place off to someone who gets it," he said. "Someone who respects the rhythm. People come here because it's familiar. You mess with that, you kill it." I nodded, thinking. That's exactly what Greg doesn't get. We kept talking over the next few weeks. I showed up almost every day, started helping Joe with odd jobs in the back, moving boxes, wiping down tables, running little errands when the short staff got overwhelmed. He never asked me to, and I never asked to be paid. I just wanted to learn. Joe eventually started opening up about the business side of things, costs, supplier headaches, the thin margins. It was rougher than I imagined, but it only made me more certain I wanted to do this. One slow Tuesday, I finally asked again, this time with intention. I told him I wasn't a millionaire, but I had enough saved to make a serious offer. I'd keep the staff, keep the name, keep the soul. I just wanted the chance to make it my own. Joe leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long time, like he was looking through me, not at me. "You sure this ain't just a rebound?" he asked. "A lot of guys lose a job and go looking for something loud to fill the silence." "I don't want loud," I said. "I want something real, and I want to protect this place, because I know what it's like to lose something that mattered." That was the first time he didn't laugh off the idea. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's talk numbers." And just like that, the door cracked open. Buying a restaurant wasn't romantic. It wasn't some feel-good movie montage with jazz music and neatly tied aprons. It was bank meetings, inspections, legal jargon, and more paperwork than I ever saw in corporate. My hands were always either holding a pen or covered in some kind of grease. Still, for the first time in months, I felt alive. Joe and I settled on a price that was fair, maybe even a little generous on his side. He said he could see I gave a damn, and that meant more to him than squeezing out a few extra bucks. I respected that. We drafted a transition plan over 6 months, where he'd stay on to help me run the place while I learned the ropes. It was his baby, after all, and I wasn't about to screw it up through pride or ignorance. I spent my days in the kitchen, at the register, shadowing deliveries, learning inventory systems that looked like they hadn't changed since the 90s. I'd mop floors at midnight, burn my fingers on the fryer, and still wake up excited to do it again. It was the opposite of my old life. Messy, unpredictable, human. And maybe that's exactly what I needed. At night, I'd go home and run spreadsheets. Costs, payroll, suppliers. I knew I couldn't just rely on passion. This place had to work. I wasn't burning through savings to play small-town hero. I wanted to prove that something honest, something built on care and consistency, could thrive, even if the world was obsessed with cutting corners and scaling fast. It was sometime in the 3rd month when I saw Greg again. He walked in on a Thursday, just like always, ordered his usual without looking at the menu. I was behind the counter tying my apron when our eyes met. He froze for just a second, long enough to know he recognized me. Then he gave me a confused smile, like he'd bumped into an old classmate in the last place he'd expect. "Ethan," he said, approaching the counter, "what are you working here?" I gave a small nod, kept my voice steady. "Something like that." He laughed. "Man, guess times really are tough, huh?" Then he tapped his phone and added, "Anyway, I'll take the usual." To go. I didn't say much, just turned and told the cook. But my chest burned. He didn't know yet. Didn't know I was the one who signed the paychecks now, that I was learning this place inside out because soon I'd own it. I wasn't just working a register. I was building a life, brick by brick, over the ashes of what he thought he took from me. I didn't need to tell him. Not yet. Let him eat his sandwich, check his emails, and walk out thinking he'd seen the ghost of a man he fired. Because someday soon, I'd welcome him through that door. As the owner, 6 months went fast. Too fast, if I'm honest. By the end of the transition, I wasn't just comfortable. I was proud. Joe handed me the keys one rainy morning with a firm handshake and a slap on the shoulder. "She's yours now," he said. "Don't screw it up." I didn't cry, but I felt something swell in my chest. Pride, gratitude, possibility. We closed the restaurant for 1 week for minor renovations. Fresh paint, fixed the flickering lights, updated the menu just a bit. I kept all the staples that mattered: Joe's meatball sandwich, the sourdough melt, and his Sunday pot roast special. But I added some new things too. Coffee from a local roaster, a few vegetarian options, even a proper online ordering system. The neighborhood noticed. The buzz started spreading before we even reopened. The grand reopening felt like a wedding and a funeral wrapped into one. Old regulars poured in like they'd been waiting for an excuse. I shook hands, cleared tables, refilled coffee, and smiled so much my cheeks hurt. Joe stopped by around noon, stood near the door with his arms crossed and a proud little smirk on his face. "Not bad, Cole," he said. "Not bad at all." And then, right on schedule, Greg walked in. He looked around, confused by the subtle changes, then approached the counter like always. I was standing behind it, wiping down a tray, wearing a black t-shirt with our new logo embroidered on the chest. Rossi's, Est 1978, Reborn 2025. He tilted his head. "You again?" He gave a short laugh. You really stuck around, huh? I did, I said. Calm. Measured. He looked around. Place looks different. Bit of an update, I said. Then I leaned forward slightly. Figured the new owner should put his mark on it. That's when he froze. He blinked once, then again, as if trying to compute what I just said. Wait. You own this place? I nodded slowly. Yeah. Closed the deal last week. This is my first official day as the owner. He gave this weird half smile like he thought I was joking. Seriously? Dead serious. Something in his face shifted then. It was subtle, but I saw it. The flicker of discomfort. The realization that the guy he'd discarded without a second thought now owned the space he came to for comfort, for ego, for routine. He glanced at the menu, then his phone, then back at me. Guess I'll take the usual. Of course, I said, but we renamed it. It's called the Severance Sandwich now. Hope that's all right? I didn't say it with spite. I wasn't looking for drama. I just wanted him to understand. You don't get to walk over people and expect the ground to stay still. He took his order to go. Didn't say much after that. As he left, Joe walked up beside me and muttered, "Now that's poetic." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because I was finally standing on ground I built myself. Weeks passed after Greg's awkward visit. He didn't come in as often anymore. When he did, he stayed quiet, polite. No more booming phone calls or knowing grins at the counter. Something in him had shifted. Maybe it was the name on the receipts. Maybe it was realizing that the guy he'd tossed out like an old stapler hadn't just landed on his feet, but stood taller. But this story was never about Greg. Not really. It was about me figuring out who I was without the title, the desk, or the steady salary. Losing that job didn't just force me out, it freed me. I'd spent a decade defining success by someone else's rules, chasing approval from people who never really knew me. And in the quiet days after the firing, I realized something I should have known years ago. Stability is a myth if you don't own even a piece of your own life. Owning Rossi's didn't make me rich. The margins were still tight. Some nights I went home smelling like fryer oil, too tired to speak. But I slept better. I woke up wanting to go in. I knew the names of my regulars, the quirks of the old oven, the sound the bell made when someone came in during the lunch rush. I learned how to manage staff not with performance reviews, but with patience and respect. And people noticed. A local food blog wrote a small piece about Rossi's rebirth, talking about the former white-collar guy who'd turned a neighborhood staple into something even more special. Business picked up. I hired a few extra hands. Joe still dropped by once a week, more relaxed now, like a retired coach watching his team from the stands. One slow Wednesday afternoon, a young guy came in. Nervous, fidgety, said he'd been laid off from a logistics firm. Didn't have restaurant experience, but was willing to do anything. Mop floors, clean dishes, whatever. I looked at him. Really looked, and saw a version of myself. "I've got a dish pit that needs love," I said. "You work hard, I'll teach you the rest." His face lit up like I'd handed him the world. And maybe I had. Later that night, I was sweeping up when I spotted my old coffee mug from the office. Chipped and faded, tucked on a shelf above the register. I picked it up, turned it in my hands, and thought about how far I'd come from that glass conference room and the cold words of a man who thought he had power. Greg fired me thinking he'd taken my future. But all he did was hand it back to me. Now, I serve breakfast to truckers and teachers, lunch to retirees and high schoolers, and the occasional quiet sandwich to the man who taught me everything not to be. Turns out revenge doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to be earned, one plate at a time.